Thank you, Crystal. Thank you, folks. I was born full-growed with 9 rows of jaw teeth and holes bored for more. There were spurs on my feet, a rawhide quirt in my hand, and when they opened the chute, I come out a-riding a panther and roping the longhorn whales. I've rode everything with hair on it, and I've rode a few things that was too rough to grow any hair. I've rode bull moose on the prod, she grizzlies, and long bolts of lightning. Mountain lions are my playmates. When I get cold and lonesome, I sleep in a den of rattlesnakes, 'cause they always make me nice and warm. To stay alive, I eat stick dynamite and cactus. The Green Canyon ain't nothing but my beanhole. When I get thirsty, I drink cyanide cut with alkali. When I go to sleep, I pillow my head on the Bighorn Mountains. I lay my boots in Colorado and my hat in Montana. I can stretch out my arms clean over from the Crazy Woman Fork all the way to the upper Gray Bull River. My bed tarp covers half of Texas and all of Old Mexico. But there's one thing for sure and certain, and if you boys want to know, I'll tell you that I'm still a long way short of being the daddy of them all, 'cause he's full-growed. And as any man that really knows can see, boys, I ain't nothing but a youngin'. Well, I come here to tell you folks I'm ragged, but I'm right. Been a rounder and a gambler, and I go out late at night. Porterhouse steak 3 times a day for my board. It's more than any loafer in this town can afford. Well, it's dark, it's raining, I'm a long ways from home. Them who don't like me can leave me alone, and my pony won't travel on this dark road at night. I tell you boys, I'm ragged, but I'm right. I got a big electric fan that keeps me cool while I sleep. Got a little baby boy plays around his daddy's feet. Got a big Stetson hat sits up on my head. I got a pretty little wife, she keeps me clean and well fed. I got a lazy old cow dog, brings me my shoes, sleeps in my bed, and we drank the same booze. He's a rounder, he's a gambler, he goes out late at night. I tell you boys, he's ragged, but he's right. Well, I hopped me a freight out in North Carolina, stopped in Atlanta and I bought me some shine. I went into a card game with 25 cents, and I come home with another month's rent. Well, you may think I'm lying, boys, but don't get me wrong. I can't run for office while I'm singing this song. I'm a rounder, I'm a gambler, I go out late at night. I tell you boys, I'm ragged, but I'm right. I tell you boys, I'm ragged, but I'm right. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. That's an old time number that learned from a record of a guy named Riley Puckett, who played guitar with a band called Gid Tanner and the Skillet Lickers. And that little recitation I started with is an old-time piece of cowboy brag talk. And I can't help but think, being out here in Jonesboro, that it's reminiscent of the Davy Crockett brags, if you've ever heard any of those old-time recitations. It's kind of in that same tradition, and that makes a lot of sense because this music and this poetry and folklore that I'm sharing with you from the cowboy culture, a lot of it started in this part of the world and found its way out west. And before it was in this part of the world, it was in the old country, and a lot of the songs originally came from England, Scotland, Ireland, and those fellas would find their way to the West and change the words to fit their surroundings. And I'm going to give you a little example of that. There's a man who made a study of these songs in the late 1800s. He was a Harvard professor named Francis J. Child. And he put together several volumes, and he would compare different versions of multiple songs, or I'm sorry, different versions of the same song, all the variants. And there'd sometimes be as many as 10 or 20 variants of one ballad. And because of his work, those songs in that collection became known as the Child Ballads. And Child Ballad number 200, I believe there were 300 songs in the collection. Child Ballad number 200 was a song entitled The Gypsy Laddie. It's sometimes called Gypsy Davy, sometimes called Blackjack David. But it found its way out west, and there's a man who is a prominent Western artist named Harry Jackson, who, as a young man, punched cows in Wyoming in the 1920s. And he learned a version of the Gypsy Laddie from the fellas he was working with. But by that time, the song had changed to the name of Clayton Boone, and it took place in New Mexico. But the basic story remained intact. So this is my version of Harry Jackson's version of Clayton Boone, also known as the Gypsy Laddie. 'Twas way out in New Mexico, along the Spanish line. I went to work for Clayton Boone. He's a man well past his prime. Well, he rode in and he asked of me what happened to my lady. I said to him, she quit your range and she run with the handsome Davy. Go saddle for me my proud cut done with the coal black mane and tail, and point out to me the fresh laid tracks, and after them I'll trail. I'll ride upon a saddle fine, a saddle made of silver, with bridle reins of beaten gold, and not your common leather. I'll buckle on my leathern chaps, I'll tie my pistol over, I'll step aboard board that proud cut done and ride this wide world over. We rode till we come to the midnight sun, and we saw the campfire burning. We heard the sweetest mandolin and the voice of young Dave singing. Have you forsaken your house and home to go with the handsome Davy? Have you forsaken my silver and gold and your darling baby? Yes, I've forsaken my house and home to go with the handsome Davy. And I'll forsake your silver and gold, all for the love of Davy. But I can't forget my baby. Last night I slept with a mean old man in golden rooms so stately. Tonight I sleep on the cold hard ground, on the warm side of my Davy, and I ride along with Davy. Was away out in New Mexico, along the Spanish line. I went to work for Clayton Boone. Well, he's a man well past his prime. Well, he wrote in and he asked of me, well, what happened to my lady? I said to him, she quit your range and she run with the handsome Davy. She left with Blackjack Davy. She's gone with the Gypsy Davy. I appreciate that. The very first man to collect the old cowboy songs was a gentleman named Jack Thorpe. Jack Thorpe had come out west from New York and became a sure enough cowboy, and he was working in Texas and New Mexico, and in 1889 he was riding through that country in eastern New Mexico, not far from the Texas line, and he rode into a cow camp one night, heard some music kind of drifting in on the air, and he rode into the camp, and it was a crew of all black cowboys, and they were playing banjos, singing a song about a cutting horse named Dodgin' Joe. And Jack Thorpe was so moved by that experience that he quit his job the very next day, wrote a letter to his boss and said, I've decided to go on this trip to collect cowboy songs, and turned in his resignation. And he did just that. He made quite a journey, collected songs all over, and eventually published that first book of songs and poems in 1908, and it was entitled Songs of the Cowboys. And it was the very first collection of cowboy songs ever published, and it's arguably the first collection of uniquely American folk songs ever published. And about 2 years later, a larger collection of cowboy songs was published by John Lomax, Cowboy Songs and Frontier Ballads. And Jack Thorpe, he wrote a wonderful autobiography, and he talked about his song collecting and had a lot of insights into the kind of songs the cowboys sang, and especially those black cowboys that he first encountered. And he said one time that they sang songs about the cotton patch, cutting horses, and women, not necessarily in that order. And I want to just kind of give you an example of one of the cotton patch songs that might be the type of thing those guys would have been singing. And it's interesting to think that they weren't just singing cowboy songs. They were singing all the different kind of songs they brought with them. The English, Scottish, and Irish guys were bringing those old ballads, and the freed slaves were finding work as cowboys, and they were bringing their music with them, kind of probably what we would think of as the music that would become the blues. And of course there were the Spanish vaqueros and other cultures too, all coming together to do a job that had never been done before, taking cattle from the Texas range to the railheads up north, and they were really mastering this new skill and creating a new kind of music at the same time. So this is one of those kind of cotton patch songs. I have a special connection to this song. It's called The Ballad of the Boll Weevil, and this particular version I play is kind of based on Leadbelly's version, although I learned it directly from an old-timer. But as a young man in West Texas, I had a short stint working for the Texas Boll Weevil Eradication Program. And I had the job of driving around cotton fields in a pickup truck, checking boll weevil traps. Not to kill the boll weevils with the traps, but to monitor how many weevils were entering and exiting each field, so they'd know how much chemical to spray in each field to kill the boll weevils. And it turns out that job was not as interesting as it sounds. And so I moved on after a few months. But this is an old-time ballad about the boll weevil. And I'm playing this on a six-string banjo, and not the traditional, or what we think of as a traditional five-string banjo, but these six-string banjos have been around just as long, if not longer, than the five-string. In fact, the first patent on a banjo in the United States in the 1860s was on a six-string banjo. And this is a newer one made out of Texas mesquite wood. And I figured that was a good idea. In case the music business goes bad, I could always go into the barbecue business. But here's the Ballad of the Boll Weevil. Have you heard the latest of my song about that old boll weevil? Well, he done been here and gone. Oh, he's looking for a home, looking for a home. Well, the first time I seen the boll weevil, he was sitting on the square. The next time I seen the boll weevil, he had his whole family there, just looking for a home, looking for a home. Well, just looking for a home. Looking for a home. Well, just looking for a home. Looking for a home. Well, the farmer took the boll weevil and put him in the ice. He gonna freeze him. The boll weevil said to the farmer, well, this is mighty cool and nice, and it'll be my home. It'll be my home. So the farmer took the boll weevil and put him in the hot sand. The boll weevil said, well, this is mighty hot, but I'll stand it like a man, and it'll be my home. It'll be my home. Well, it'll be my home. It'll be my home. It'll be my home. It'll be my home. Well, the boll weevil ate half the cotton. The merchant got the rest. Didn't leave that farmer's wife but the one old cotton dress. And it's full of holes. It's full of holes. Well, the farmer said to the missus, what do you think of that? The boll weevil done and made a nest in my brand new Stetson hat, and it's full of holes. It's full of holes. Well, it's full of holes. It's full of holes. Well, it's full of holes. Full of holes. Well, if anybody should ask you who composed this song, well, tell them it was Hughie Ledbetter, and he done been here and gone. Oh, he's looking for a home. Looking for a home. Thank you. Well, those fellas, singing those songs, they were also writing and reciting poetry. From the very beginning, poetry was a part of the cowboy tradition, and that's carried on all the way to the present day. And there's still working cowboys, ranchers, ranch women, who recite the old traditional poems and who are writing their own poetry. And I've taken a real interest in that myself. And Crystal mentioned that I have a podcast about cowboy culture and cowboy poetry. That's called Cowboy Crossroads. And I do what you might call oral history interviews with old timers and old ranchers and fellow musicians and poets and reciters. And I sometimes pick up some material in those interviews, and I'm going to give you a little example of that. I interviewed a North Dakota rancher by the name of Rodney Nelson, and he actually passed away a year or two after I interviewed him, but he was a wonderful poet, rodeo cowboy, and just all-around Western character. And something I like to ask people who recite poetry is what their first exposure was to poetry as a young person and what kind of set him on that path and gave him that interest. And in the case of Rodney Nelson, it was his mother who recited poetry to him. And he recited a little piece of verse for me that he learned from his mother. It's just an old traditional piece. Nobody knows who wrote it. But I knew when I heard Rodney do this is one I wanted to commit to memory. It's just a little short poem entitled, I Don't. My mother told me not to smoke. I don't. Or listen to a naughty joke. I don't. At pretty girls I mustn't wink, nor must I even think of taking a forbidden drink. I don't. Some boys play cards all night long. I don't. Wild youth engage in wine and song. I don't. From naughty things I always run. You wouldn't think I have much fun. I don't. And after I learned that from Rodney, I actually found that in an old book of recitations, and it had a little companion piece that goes with it. And I was looking forward to sharing this with Rodney next time I saw him, and then I didn't get that chance, unfortunately. But I like to share it with audiences. And Rodney was the kind of guy who always had a grin on his face, always had a one-liner, and loved talking to a pretty girl, and he was just that kind of a character. And so I like to share this one and think about how much he would have enjoyed it. This one didn't have a title, but it simply says, I never kiss, I never neck, I never say damn, I never say heck. I'm always good, I'm always nice, play no cards, shoot no dice. I have no line of dirty tricks, but give me time, I'm only 6. So that's a couple of examples, things I pick up through these interviews. And it's interesting, this poetry tradition, because it has carried forward to modern times. And in the mid-1980s, a group of folklorists out west discovered this was a living tradition and had an event in Elko, Nevada, called the Cowboy Poetry Gathering. And it's now called the National Cowboy Poetry Gathering. And they got all these guys and gals together, and it's really turned into a pretty incredible event and movement. And as a young man, I was blessed to discover that and kind of fall in with that crowd, and particularly a group of Texas cowpunchers who wrote really profound poetry. And I'm going to recite one of those poems for you. It was written by a man who was a good friend of mine named Larry McWhorter. And Larry was from the panhandle of Texas. His father was the famed Texas fiddler Frankie McWhorter, who played with Bob Wills and the Texas Playboys. And I am reminded of a quote when I recite this poem from one of our former United States poet laureates, a man named Stanley Kunitz, said one time that if we want to know what it felt like to be alive at any point in the great odyssey of the race, that it's to poetry we must turn. And I would say if you want to know what it felt like to be a Texas cowpuncher in the latter part of the 20th century, you could read the poetry of my old friend Larry McWhorter. I almost put my robe on her once, but then I thought it through. I'd had my day in the sun long ago, so I left her for someone like you. Sounds to me like she run you off, I said to the silver-haired man. Why, there ain't a cow brood anywhere too much for a hand worth his sand. We were talking about the old red cow, a legend round these parts, and it's been said she'd put fear and dread in the punchiest cowboys' hearts. An old barren cow who'd escaped all the drives 'cause she was big, mean, and clever. Manager said she was 12 years old. The old men said she'd been there forever. Now, legends don't scare a boy of 19 who thinks he's the pride of the nation, and I'm thinking, If I pin this old cow, I'll sure have a good reputation. Where do I find this renegade beast, this scarlet scourge of the prairie? I'll lead the hussy through the bunkhouse door and you'll think she was raised on a dairy. I'll bring her in and she'll bear a grin, for she'll know that she's had her licking. For I'm a hand from the faraway land where the hoot owls romance the chickens. Well, a gleam appeared in the old man's eye, and he was grinning a little too much. I'll tell you where the red cow lives, and while you're gone, I'll carve you a crutch. Oh, and give me your address before you leave. You'll want me to write your folks. Well, I left him there to amuse himself. I didn't care for his little jokes. The Sabbath sun caught me riding old Gus, sneaking through the brush like a ghost till we come to the mouth of the canyon where that outlaw had been seen the most, and we come up on an old dirt tank about halfway up that draw, and standing there for her morning drink was the biggest cow I ever saw. Her horns weren't tipped, and she wore no brand, and her ears were long and slick, and I thought of a big old rhinoceros I'd seen in a Tarzan flick. I knew if I showed myself to her now, back up the canyon she'd go, so I eased up high so I could drive her on down and catch her in the big flat below. Well, I cinched up a notch, shook out a loop, pulled my horn knot tight, then I eased old Gus to the edge of the brush and showed myself ready to fight. She jerked up her head when we come in the clear, and a startled look filled her eyes. I had to grin, for my little ruse caught the wily red cow by surprise. She's scared and confused with no place to hide. I've wrecked her psyche, I think. But she stood there, sized up her latest of pests, and then calmly went back to her drink. Well, we sat there and stared at each other a while till the red cow had drunk her fill. Then she stretched out her back and ever so slowly started walking towards me, up the hill. Her stride betrayed no fear at all. It's like she'd been through this before. About then, I started to doubt my own smarts, and I pondered the red cow's lore. Her slow, steady walk turned into a trot, and her mouth began to foam. And the closer she got, the more that I wished that me and old Gus had stayed home. The walls of that canyon somehow looked steeper, and it looked a lot narrower, too. My perception had changed on a whole lot of things. In my brashness, I started to rue. I'd made my brag back at the ranch about the worth of a man who would balk. I found myself falling victim to my own yapping tongue's foolish talk. A moment of truth was on me now. My smarts was fighting my pride, and that cow was locked in on me and old Gus. Then my outlook was rectified. The boss hadn't sent me out here on this wildcat venture of such. If she didn't bother him, then why should she me? Hell, one old red cow don't eat much. 50 feet between me and the cow, another thought entered my mind. There were many like me, but this cow that I faced was one of the last of her kind. Who was I to alter her fate? Her freedom she'd fought long to keep. Far be it from me to ruin her life. Oh, I could pin her, but then could I sleep? Well, I cringed at the thought of a grinning old man, the scorn I'd see in his eye, but I knew I was right. So I tipped my hat as the famous red cow trotted by. The old man was waiting when I got in, the bunkhouse door open wide. I've got things ready for you and your cow. A stool and a pail stood inside. Well, he rode me hard and he put me up wet till he seen that my pride was full peeled, but the scorn I expected he never showed. He said, "Son, I know just how you feel. You ain't the first to change his mind after doubting the red cow's lore. Few boys your age have dealt with her kind, but on her coup stick, you're just one more. There comes a time in every man's life when he's forced to face his limitation. Now you feel like a fraud, but your judgment was sound, so, son, you ain't no imitation. Oh, you talked a lot, but you took your shot, which is more than many have done. She force-fed you crow, but that taste we all know. So welcome to the humbled ranks, son. Well, the years have gone by and I reckon she's died. I know I never saw her again. But with all my heart, I hope that old girl never saw the inside of a pen. And though she's gone, her legend lives on, and I'm proud to be part of her lore, for the times have changed, and a brute of her kind is rarely seen anymore. The young sprouts now ask me about the cow. Tight-throated, I think of that day. I recall my old friend and what he told me back then, and I grin at these pups, and I say, I almost put my rope on her once, but then I thought it through. Poem written by Larry McWhorter. 20 miles away, the REA ran out of poles and wire. I earned my pay the cowboy way. I'm a horseback man for hire. Yippee-yay-yay. I'm a horseback man for hire. Where I was born, every saddle horn had a rope tied hard and fast. All the boots were worn, all the shirts were torn, and we held on to the past. Yippee-yay-yay. We held on to the past. Now I take my turns in the mule-hide burns when I need to slip a coil. I play my gig on a double rig. I'm a grandson of the soil. Yippee-yay-yay. I'm a grandson of the soil. Well, I'm no one's fool. I've been to school. I've taken my degree. But the cattle ball and the coyotes call are the things that beckon me. They're the things that call to me. So I step astride and I start my ride while the sun is still asleep. I'm bona fide, I've been certified, and my roots run mighty deep. Yippee-yay-yay. My roots run mighty deep. And I don't need to smoke your weed to get me feeling right. Just a canvas bed to lay my head when the stars come out at night. Yippee-yay-yay. With the dipper shining bright. And my thumbs ain't flexed 'cause I don't text. Your emails leave me cold. Go lick a stamp that'll find my camp on a letter I can hold. Yippee-yay-yay. Send a letter I can hold. Well, I like a good book by my chair. I like hot tea by the fire, where I can read without a care while the wind howls through the wire. 'Cause I'm a horseback man for hire. Well, your gilded halls and shopping malls can't hold me very long. So I've quit the scene to find cuisine to be where I belong. Yippee-yay-yay. Out here's where I belong. I got a darn good life and a darling wife. She sets my heart on fire. She's a pretty thing and she wears my ring. She's a horseback and for hire. Yippee-yay-yay. She's a horseback girl for hire. But when it ceases to be, you can bury me or build a funeral pyre. Spread my ash and divide my cash with a horseback man for hire. Yippee-yay-yay. With a horseback man for hire. I need lots of space from the human race. I need solitude from the multitude. I need reverie on the lone prairie. These are things that I require. 'Cause I'm a horseback man for hire, and you can't take it away. I'm a horseback man for hire. Horseback man for hire. Thank you. As you can probably tell, that's a modern cowboy song written by a friend of mine, lifelong working cowboy, horseman, and poet down in Alpine, Texas, named Joel Nelson. And I always make a point to share the writers of these songs, poems, and the stories behind them, because I'm just kind of an interpreter of this material, just the messenger, and so I want to always give those fellas credit. There's a man who became one of the probably top 3 of the classic cowboy poets who whose work is really important to me, and he was from Las Vegas, New Mexico, out in northeastern New Mexico. His name was Squire Omer Barker. He was born in 1894 and died in 1985. And in his lifetime, he was a rancher, a soldier, school teacher, a musician, a legislator, but he was mostly a writer. And he left behind a wealth of poetry and short stories, and a lot of those poems really entered the oral tradition of cowboy poetry. He was quite a character. His initials, again, his name was Squire Omer Barker. He was known as S. Omer Barker. That was his writing name, which made his initials S.O.B. And he had the great idea to use those initials for his cattle brand, and he turned that S on its side. And if you know how to read a cattle brand, that would have made his brand the Lazy S.O.B. And he went to register that brand with the state of New Mexico, and he said, "Some other lazy S.O.B. beat me to it." So as you can tell, he was kind of a character, and he really knew how to have fun with words. And that's so much of what poetry and storytelling is about, is really enjoying the language and the lingo, that comes with these different cultures, like the cowboy culture. And so this is a little example of that. It's a piece of his entitled "Pert Near." Well, they called him Pert Near Perkins, for unless that booger lied, he had pert near done most everything that he had ever tried. He had pert near been a preacher, and he pert near roped a bear. He met up with Comanches once, and he pert near lost his hair. He'd pert near wed an heiress who had money by the keg, and he pert near caught the measles once. And he pert near broke his leg. He'd pert near been a trail boss, and according to his claim, he pert near shot Bill Hickok, which had pert near won him fame. He had pert near rode some broncs upon which no one else had stuck, and in fact, this is the cowboy who had pert near drowned a duck. Now, mostly all the fellas on the lazy SB spread sort of took his talking with a grin and let him fight his head, but one, named Tom McGinnis, sort of told it to him rough. He said, "You're riding for an outfit now where pert near ain't enough. Out here we tie our lash ropes to the horn. What we catch we hold, and pert near is one alibi we never do unfold. In fact, right now I'll tell you, of all the words I hear, there's none as plain damn useless as the pair pert near." Well, that's how old Tom McGinnis laid it out upon the line, and like a heap of preaching talk, it sounded mighty fine. But one day, Tom McGinnis, while riding off alone, he lamed his horse and had to catch some neighbor Nestor's roan to ride back to the ranch on. And somewhere along the way, a bunch of Nestors held him up, and there was hell to pay. Tom said, "I never stole the horse, I just borrowed it to ride." But them Nestors hated cowboys, and they told him that he lied. They took him for a horse thief, and they'd caught him with the goods, and they sat right out to hang him in a nearby patch of woods. They tied a rope around his neck, they threw it o'er a limb, and Tom McGinnis pert near knowed this was the last of him. Then suddenly a shot rang out from somewhere up the hill, and them nesters dropped their ropes and run like nesters sometimes will when bullets go to whizzin', and Tom's heart leapt up with hope to see old pert near Perkins riding towards him at a lope. "Looks like I pert near got here just in time," old Perkins said, "to see them nesters hang you." Tom's face got kind of red. "You pert near did," he pert near grinned. "They pert near had me strung. You're looking at a cowboy who's pert near just been hung, and also one who's changed his mind, for no words ever said could sound as sweet as pert near when a man's been pert near dead." Well, thank you. I got into that. I wasn't sure if I should explain what the word pert near means or not. I'm used to reciting that out west. Do y'all use that phrase around here? Yeah. Pretty near? Yeah. Well, I'm going to do another piece for you written by Omer Barker, and this is a piece of his from his very first book from 1924, and I set this to music, and it's kind of about the call of the cowboy life. And for some reason, a lot of people have that within them, that they feel drawn to cowboy culture, drawn out west, and that's how a lot of people end up out there, and it's always been that way. You know, I mentioned Jack Thorpe to you, came from New York, and you could name a lot of famous cowboys and westerners that was their story. People like Will James and Charlie Russell and Ramblin' Jack Elliott, and then a lot of folks who maybe never find their way out west, but they always kind of feel drawn to it, have a love for it. And I was that way from the time I was a little kid. I was always wearing boots and cowboy hat, loved everything to do with the cowboy. And my dad actually, and I should say I kind of get that from my dad, who rode bulls in his younger days and kind of passed on that love to me, not of riding bulls in particular, but his love of the West, and was the first person to play old Western music for me. And he told me one time that he had a feeling I was going to be his cowboy son, and that's why he named me Andy, because he thought that was a cowboy-sounding name. Now, my mom, on the other hand, she told me that I was named after a song about a dog by Dolly Parton called Me and Little Andy. So I go with my dad's version of the story. All that to say, this poem is kind of talking about that, the way some folks are drawn to the cowboy way of life from an early age. Traced in the flicker of greasewood fire, the cowboy kid saw his heart's desire. Still but a lad in a play cow camp, his ears heard the milling remuda stamp, and he knew his heart would know no rest till he could scratch 'em along with the best. Saddle a creek with his horse's stride, a boy a dream for the time when he could answer the range's witchery. ruddled there by the hearth fire's flame, grizzled and old as a Salem dame. His hair is whitish as alkali. The cowboy kid sees his past go by, and he smells the sage off the mesa's rim. As the days come tumbling back to him, days that were tinged with the smell of hair, burnt to the brand came clean and fair, and nights that were droned with the milling herd. His feeble heart within him stirred, and out of the phantom in the flame, into his soul the old call came. Oh, a heart knows not when a body is old, and riding days are a tale that is told. For he would saddle and over the hill ride to the ranges that beckoned him still, and there by the fire as he fell asleep, the old man's pulses ceased their sweep of cowboy blood through his leather veins. A west wind called from his sagebrush plains, and off to dim ranges of mounted men, the cowboy kid rode forth again. Oh, thank you, folks. Y'all have been a wonderful audience, and I've got one more little tune for you. I just want to say it's a real honor to perform for you. It's a thrill to be here in Jonesboro at the International Storytelling Center. It's my second time out to this part of the world. I got to come out here for the National Storytelling Festival a few years ago, and just thank all the folks here for having me. And you know, every community in America should be so blessed to have a place like this preserving the storytelling and folk traditions of our country. So my hat's off to them. It's also an honor to be representing cowboy culture out here and here at the Storytelling Center. And good friend of mine who's been active in this world at the National Festival and other places is Waddy Mitchell. And Waddy's the first cowboy poet I ever heard as a kid. He's from Elko County, Nevada. And I could go on talking about him, but I'm bringing him up to say that I wrote this song with Waddy along with some help from my wife, Alyssa. And our hour's nearly over, so I'll just jump into the song and let y'all hear this one. But thanks for being here with me. Lies knee-high in South Bitter Creek, and I'm told it's time for bath. I was soaked up and bent over and a scrubbing on my calves. when I hear a bunch of giggling from a gaggle of Girl Scouts, single file on the trail, not sure what I'm about. Well, there I stood as they marched by, and me with no robe to don, and things could have got explicit, except I had my long johns on. Well, that could have been embarrassing, could have been plain wrong. My long johns needed washing, or I mightn't have had 'em on. My long johns on, something that I always make sure to have on. It ain't as if they thought I was doing something wrong. No, it's all good, I had my long johns on, my long johns on, my long johns on. Without them, this'd be a different song. Thank gosh they started smelling rough and strong. No, it's all good, I had my long johns on. Oh, he's having us a picnic over there at McDougal Lake, eating ham and sweet potatoes and some German chocolate cake. Well, we brought along some swimsuits, so we hid and put 'em on. When I dove off this big rock, my suit slipped and it was gone. Well, I ain't no deep sea diver. Where they sunk, they'll always lay. Luckily, I had my long johns on, which saved our picnic day. Well, that could have been embarrassing, could have been plain wrong. My long johns needed washing, or I mightn't have had 'em on. My long johns on, my long johns on, something you should always make sure to have on. It ain't as if they saw me in a purple thong. No, it's all good, I had my long johns on, my long johns on, my long johns on. Without them, this'd be a different song. Thank gosh they started smelling rough and strong. It's all good, I had my long johns on. Well, about this point in the song, I do like to apologize if this little ditty is stuck in your head for the next few days. But there's a remedy for that, and some of you probably know this, that if you ever get a song stuck in your head, the one thing you can do to get it out of your head is to go listen to that song. So for your convenience, I do have this song on a CD that's available in the gift shop when you're leaving. It's a CD called Shadow of a Cowboy if you're looking for it out there. But I got one more verse here for you. Goes like this. Well, we'd been to see Tom Selleck at the moving picture show, then went back to her apartment where things didn't happen slow. She excused herself to freshen up. I stripped down while she was gone. She returned and screamed until she saw that I had my long johns on. Well, that could have been embarrassing, could have been plain wrong. My long johns were just fresh washed, or I mightn't have had 'em on. My long johns on, my long johns on. I'm lucky that I always seem to have 'em on. I wasn't inappropriate or doing wrong. No, it's all good, I had my long johns on, my long johns on, my long johns on. How often do you hear about 'em in a song? Under outer garments is where they belong. No, it's all good, I had my long johns on. No, it's all good, I had my long johns on. No, it's all good, I had my long johns on. Thank you, folks. Appreciate y'all being here. Thanks for visiting the International Storytelling Center, and hope to see you down the road somewhere.